The summer I met Grant Calloway, I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't even looking for anything that could make my life more complicated. After the previous year, complicated was the last thing I wanted. I wanted quiet mornings, steady work, and enough money to stop checking my bank account before buying groceries. Most of all, I wanted to forget what it felt like to trust someone completely and then discover that trust had meant nothing to them. So when Mason called me one warm afternoon in June, I almost didn't answer. "Caleb, I have a job for you." I laughed softly. "You sound like you're about to sell me something." "I'm serious." "That makes it worse." Mason laughed, but his voice changed when he explained the details. His uncle needed help with a summer restoration project at an old lakeside property. The work would last about 8 weeks. The pay was good, the place was quiet, and Mason thought I would be perfect for it. I almost said no. Then he mentioned the money. That changed everything. 2 days later, I was standing outside the old Calloway house with one suitcase, a worn backpack, and a strange feeling in my chest. The house stood beyond a long gravel road, surrounded by tall trees and wild grass. A lake stretched behind it, catching the afternoon sunlight like a sheet of broken glass. It was beautiful. Almost too beautiful for someone like me, who had spent the last year trying not to remember anything. The front door opened before I could knock. Grant Calloway stood there. I had seen photographs of him before, but photographs hadn't prepared me for the real person. He was older than me by more than a decade, with dark hair touched lightly by gray and a calm expression that made it difficult to know what he was thinking. He looked at me for a moment, then he smiled. "Caleb?" "Yeah. I'm Grant." "I know." The words came out too quickly. His smile grew slightly. "Mason talks a lot. You have no idea." That earned me the smallest laugh. Surprised me. Something about his voice was softer than I expected. He stepped aside. "Come in. You must be tired." The house smelled like old wood, coffee, and rain. I didn't know then that I would remember that smell months later. Maybe some memories become important before we realize they are happening. The first week was simple. We worked. The property needed more attention than Mason had described. The porch needed repairing. Several rooms needed painting. The garden had become almost impossible to control. Grant worked beside me most mornings. He never treated me like hired help. When I carried boxes, he carried them too. When I stayed late, he stayed late. And whenever I complained about the heat, he quietly appeared with a cold bottle of water. "You don't have to keep doing that," I told him one afternoon. "Doing what?" "Taking care of me." He looked at me for several seconds. "I'm not." "You kind of are." Grant looked toward the lake. "Maybe I'm just making sure you don't collapse on my property." I smiled. "That's comforting." "It should be." I laughed. For the first time in months, the sound felt natural. That bothered me. I wasn't supposed to feel comfortable around anyone. Comfort made people careless. And I had learned what happened when I became careless with my heart. Still, something changed between us during those first few weeks. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could point to. It was in the small things. Grant remembered how I took my coffee. He noticed when I was quiet. He asked about my family without pushing when I didn't want to answer. Sometimes I caught him looking at me. Whenever that happened, he looked away first. I told myself it meant nothing. I needed it to mean nothing. One evening, a storm rolled across the lake. Rain struck the windows so hard that the whole house seemed to tremble. We had been working upstairs when the electricity suddenly went out. Grant found 2 candles. I sat at the kitchen table while he made coffee on the gas stove. The candlelight softened his face. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Grant said, "Do you ever think some houses remember people?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Every room has a history." He glanced around the kitchen. "People leave things behind. Arguments, laughter, promises." His voice became quieter. "Sometimes I think places remember what people try to forget." I didn't know why those words affected me. Maybe because I had been trying to forget too. "Did someone leave something here?" I asked. Grant's expression changed. Just slightly. Someone left me. I didn't ask who. He didn't explain. Outside, thunder moved across the lake. After a moment, Grant looked at me. You've been hurt too. It wasn't a question. I looked down at my hands. Yeah. Badly? I swallowed. Enough. He nodded. There was no pity in his eyes. That mattered to me. Most people looked at heartbreak like it was something embarrassing. Grant didn't. He simply understood. Trust is difficult afterward, he said. I looked up. You know that feeling? His smile was sad. Better than I'd like. For several seconds, we just looked at each other. Something passed between us. Something quiet. Something neither of us was ready to name. Then the lights came back. The moment disappeared. Grant stood. Good night, Caleb. Good night. He walked upstairs. I remained at the table. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I told myself it was because of the storm. I told myself it was because of everything we talked about. I told myself a lot of things that night. None of them were completely true. The next morning, Mason called. So, he said, how's my uncle? I smiled despite myself. Your uncle is fine. There was a pause. Just fine. I frowned. What does that mean? Nothing. Mason. He sighed. Just keep things professional, okay? My smile disappeared. Why? Another pause. Then he said quietly, because Grant has a complicated past. I looked across the room toward the window. Grant was outside near the lake, repairing the old wooden fence. He looked peaceful. Almost lonely. What happened? I can't tell you. Then why mention it? Mason didn't answer. The call ended a few seconds later. I stood there watching Grant through the glass. He turned suddenly. Our eyes met. For one strange second, neither of us moved. Then Grant smiled. I smiled back. And that was the moment I should have realized the summer was already changing me. I had arrived at that house believing I was there to repair old walls. I didn't know yet that someone was about to reach the parts of me I had spent a year trying to protect. And I certainly didn't know that before summer ended. I would have to decide whether love was worth trusting again. By the middle of July, the lake house no longer felt like a temporary place. It felt familiar. The old wooden floorboards no longer creaked beneath my feet like warnings. I knew which window stuck when it rained, which cupboard held the coffee, and which part of the garden received enough sunlight for the flowers to survive. Most of all, I knew Grant, or at least I thought I did. He was quieter in the mornings. He liked his coffee strong and his breakfast simple. He hated unnecessary noise. He always checked the doors twice before going to bed. And when he thought nobody was watching, he sometimes stood beside the lake for several minutes without moving. I never asked what he was thinking. Some things deserved silence. Our days developed a rhythm. We worked together until late afternoon, took a break near the lake, then returned to the house before sunset. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we barely spoke. Strangely, both felt comfortable. One morning, I was painting the upstairs hallway when Grant appeared behind me. You missed a spot. I looked at the wall. Where? He pointed. Right there. I stared at it. I don't see anything. You're standing too close. I stepped backward. Grant stepped forward. For a moment, we were standing almost shoulder to shoulder. He reached around me and touched the wall with one finger. Here. His voice was quiet. I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us moved. Then Grant stepped away. Now you can see it. I stared at the tiny unfinished patch. Yeah. My voice sounded different. He noticed. I knew he did. But he said nothing. That was becoming our pattern. Something would happen. A look would last too long. A hand would almost touch another hand. A conversation would become more personal than either of us expected. Then one of us would retreat. Neither wanted to be the first to admit what was happening. I certainly didn't. I had already learned how dangerous feelings could become. My previous relationship had taught me that affection could look sincere right up until the moment it wasn't. I wasn't ready to make that mistake again. But Grant made it difficult to remain distant. He listened. Really listened. When I talked, he didn't wait impatiently for his turn. When I stopped talking, he didn't force me to continue. One evening, we sat outside while the sun disappeared behind the trees. Grant handed me a glass of lemonade. "You've been quiet today." "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit." I smiled. "You started it." He looked toward the lake. "What are you thinking about?" I hesitated. "You." His eyes moved toward me. I immediately regretted saying it. "Sorry," I added quickly. "I mean the job, the house, everything." Grant watched me for a moment. Then he smiled. "You don't have to explain." That somehow made things worse. A week later, Mason came to visit. The moment he arrived, the atmosphere changed. I noticed it immediately. Mason hugged me and joked about how much better I looked. Then he looked toward Grant. Something passed between them, something I couldn't understand. Later, while Grant was inside, Mason lowered his voice. "You're getting close to him." I frowned. "We're working together. You know what I mean." "No, I don't." Mason looked uncomfortable. "Just be careful. Everyone keeps telling me that." "Because we're trying to protect you." I stared at him. "From what?" He looked toward the house. "From getting hurt again." I felt something tighten inside me. "I decide who hurts me." Mason shook his head. "You don't know everything about Grant." "Then tell me." "I can't." "Why?" "Because it's not my story." That answer stayed with me long after Mason left. That night, Grant found me sitting alone on the porch. "You okay?" "Your nephew worries about you." Grant sighed. "Mason worries about everyone. He told me to stay away from you." Grant went still. "He said that." "Not exactly." I looked at him. "But close enough." Grant sat beside me. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked, "Do you want me to keep my distance?" I looked at him. The honest answer came immediately. "No." Something softened in his expression. "Neither do I." The words were simple, but they changed everything. Grant looked toward the dark lake. "I don't want to complicate your life." "You haven't." "I could. Maybe." He smiled faintly. "You're very honest." "Someone has to be." That made him laugh. Then his expression became serious again. "Caleb, there are things about my past you should know." My heart began beating faster. "What things?" Grant looked down at his hands. "I trusted someone once." "You told me." "I loved him." The words were quiet. I waited. "He promised me he wasn't going anywhere." Grant's voice tightened. Then one day, I discovered he'd been living another life behind my back. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "I thought I would never trust anyone again." "Did you?" "Not for a long time." His eyes met mine. "Until recently." My breath caught. He looked away almost immediately. I pretended not to understand. But I did. And maybe he knew that. The next few days became strangely tender. We didn't discuss the conversation. Instead, we became more careful with each other. Grant would leave coffee beside my tools. I would bring him lunch when he forgot to eat. Sometimes our shoulders touched while we worked. Neither of us moved away. Then, one afternoon, I found an old photograph inside a desk drawer. Grant was standing beside a younger man. They were smiling. They looked happy. On the back was a date from 12 years earlier. I turned the photograph over again. The man beside Grant looked familiar. Not familiar because I'd seen him before. Familiar because I had seen his face somewhere else. When Grant entered the room, he stopped. "Where did you find that?" His voice was different. Careful. I held the photograph out. Who is he? Grant didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the picture. Finally, he said, "Someone I used to know." That's not the whole answer. No. Then what is? Grant looked at me. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of me. Fear of what the truth might change. Before he could speak, Mason appeared at the doorway. He saw the photograph. His face went pale. "Caleb," he said quietly. I looked between them. "You know him?" Mason didn't answer. Grant closed his eyes. And suddenly, the quiet summer I had begun to love didn't feel quiet anymore. Felt like the silence before something broke. I knew something was wrong the moment Mason walked into the room. He looked at the photograph in my hand, then at Grant. Neither of them spoke. The silence told me more than an explanation could have. "Who is he?" I asked again. Mason rubbed his hands together. "Caleb, it's complicated." I almost laughed. That seems to be everyone's favorite answer. Grant stepped toward me. "Let me explain." I looked at him. "Then explain." He stopped. For several seconds, the only sound was the rain beginning against the windows. Finally, Grant said, "His name was Daniel." The name meant nothing to me. Not yet. "He was someone I loved," Grant continued. "A long time ago." I looked at Mason. "And you know him?" Mason nodded slowly. "He was connected to our family." "How?" Mason looked at Grant. Grant gave him a tired expression. "Tell him." Mason swallowed. "Daniel was my mother's close friend." I frowned. "That doesn't explain why you both looked terrified when I found the picture." Mason didn't answer. I felt something cold settle inside me. "What aren't you telling me?" Grant stepped closer. "I should have told you earlier." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing what we were becoming." That answer hurt more than I expected. What were we becoming? Grant looked directly at me. Something important. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe him. That was the problem. I wanted to believe him so badly that it frightened me. I turned toward Mason. "How did Grant know about me before I came here?" Mason's expression changed. That was the moment I understood. "You told him." He looked down. "I told him some things." "What things?" "Caleb." "What things?" Mason finally looked at me. "About what happened with your ex." The room seemed to become smaller. I stared at him. "You told him?" "I was worried about you." "You told him about my private life?" "I didn't mean." "You had no right." My voice shook. Mason stepped toward me. "I was trying to protect you. By telling someone I barely knew about the worst thing that ever happened to me?" Grant looked away. I turned toward him. "And you knew?" "Yes." The word was quiet, but it broke something inside me. I felt betrayed by both of them. I had spent weeks telling Grant things I had never told anyone else. I had trusted him because I thought he had chosen to listen. Now I wondered how much of that trust had been built on information he had received from someone else. "You knew what happened before you met me?" Grant nodded. "Yes." "And you still hired me?" "Yes." "Why?" His eyes filled with regret. "Because I needed help with the project." "That isn't the only reason." "No." I waited. Grant took a slow breath. "I recognized your loneliness." I looked at him in disbelief. "You recognized it because Mason told you?" "Yes." "And you decided you could fix me?" "No." "Then what did you decide?" Grant's voice became softer. "I decided you deserved somewhere safe to work for the summer." I shook my head. "You should have asked me." "You're right." That answer stopped me for a second. There was no excuse. No attempt to defend himself. Just regret. But regret couldn't undo what had happened. I walked outside. The rain had become heavier. Mason followed me onto the porch. "Caleb, please." I turned. "You were my best friend. I still am." "I don't know that anymore." His face fell. "I was scared." "Of what?" "That you'd get hurt again." I stared at him. "You don't get to decide who I love." "I know." "No, you don't." My voice cracked. "If you knew, you wouldn't have made the decision for me." Mason looked down. "I thought I was helping." "You were helping yourself." He looked at me. "What does that mean?" "It means you couldn't stand the idea of me trusting someone you didn't control." His eyes filled with tears. He didn't argue. That silence hurt too. Later that night, I packed my things. Grant stood outside my bedroom door. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer immediately. Then I opened the door. He remained in the hallway. "I won't stop you from leaving." "Good. I just want you to know something." I looked at him. Everything that happened between us was real. My eyes burned. "Was it?" "Yes." "You knew things about me before I told you." "Yes." "And you still let me believe I was telling you those things for the first time." "I was wrong." His voice broke slightly. "I should have told you." I looked away. "I trusted you." "I know." "No, Grant." I looked back at him. "You don't know what that means to me." He said nothing. I continued. "I don't trust people easily." "I know. And when I finally do, I need honesty." "I understand." "I can't stay here." Grant nodded. "I understand that too." There was something painful about how easily he accepted my decision. Part of me wanted him to fight. Part of me wanted him to tell me that everything could be fixed immediately. Instead, he simply stepped back. "I hope someday you can forgive me." I closed the door. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the quiet kind of crying that leaves you exhausted. The next morning, I left before sunrise. The lake was covered in mist. I didn't look back at the house until I reached the end of the road. Grant was standing on the porch. He didn't wave. Neither did I. On the drive home, I kept replaying our conversations. His jokes. His stories. The coffee he remembered. The nights beside the lake. The way he had looked at me when he said something important. None of those moments felt fake. That was what made everything worse. Because somewhere between the beginning and the betrayal, I had fallen in love with him. I didn't want to admit it, but I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I loved Grant. And I hated that the person who made me feel safe had also become the reason I felt unsafe. 3 days after I left, Mason called. I almost ignored him, but I answered. His voice sounded tired. "Caleb, I need to tell you the rest." I closed my eyes. "Go ahead." "Grant didn't hire you because he wanted to manipulate you." "I know." "He asked me about you because he was worried." "Why?" There was a long silence. "Because he liked you before you ever came here." I couldn't breathe for a moment. "That doesn't make it better." "I know." Mason continued. "He didn't ask me to tell him everything. I did that myself." I said nothing. "I thought if I warned him about your past, he would be careful with you. And instead, he fell for you." The words stayed between us. I looked toward the window. Outside, summer sunlight filled the street. Everything looked normal. But I didn't feel normal anymore. I had thought leaving the lake house would make the feelings disappear. It hadn't. It had only made me realize how deeply they had taken root. And somewhere across town, Grant was probably standing alone in that old house, wondering whether I would ever return. For the first time since I left, I wondered the same thing. But I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. Because love could explain why someone made a mistake. It couldn't erase the damage that mistake caused. For the first few days after leaving the lake house, I convinced myself I had made the right decision. I returned to my apartment, unpacked my suitcase, and tried to rebuild the routine I had before summer began. Work. groceries, laundry, sleep, repeat. It should have felt normal. Instead, everything felt strangely empty. My apartment had never seemed particularly small before. Now the walls felt closer. There was no lake outside my window, no old wooden floor creaking upstairs, no coffee waiting beside my tools, and no Grant quietly asking whether I had eaten. I hated that I missed those things. More than that, I hated that I missed him. A week passed before I received a message from Grant. It was short. "I'm sorry. I understand why you left. I won't pressure you to come back. I only hope you know that what I felt for you was real." I read it several times. Then I put my phone down. I didn't answer. Another day passed. Then another. He didn't send anything else. Somehow that made the message harder to forget. He had given me space. He wasn't demanding forgiveness. He wasn't asking me to understand. He simply accepted that I was hurt. And slowly that began changing something inside me. One evening, Mason came to my apartment. I almost didn't open the door. When I finally did, he looked exhausted. "I won't stay long," he said. I stepped aside. He sat on the couch. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You were right." I looked at him. "About what?" "I tried to protect you because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you would love someone and get destroyed again." I lowered my eyes. Mason continued, "But I didn't realize that I was hurting you by taking away your choice." I nodded slowly. "That was the worst part." "I know." He took a breath. "Grant never asked me to tell him about your past." I looked up. "He didn't?" "No." "Then why did you?" "Because I knew he cared about you." I stared at him. "You knew before I did?" Mason smiled sadly. "Everyone knew except you." I didn't smile. "That's not funny." "I know." He reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. "What is that?" "Something Grant asked me to give you." I didn't touch it. "You can throw it away if you want." After Mason left, I stared at the envelope for almost an hour. Eventually, I opened it. There was only one page. Grant had written everything by hand. He didn't defend himself. He didn't blame Mason. He didn't ask for another chance. He simply admitted that he had been afraid. Afraid that if he told me how he knew about my past, I would never let him close. Afraid that if he told me how quickly he had started caring about me, I would leave before we had a chance. And afraid because the last time he had trusted someone completely, it had ended with betrayal. At the bottom, he had written, "I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that you were never a project to me." I read that sentence twice. Then I cried. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. I cried because I finally understood that Grant had been afraid too. That didn't excuse what he had done. But it made him human. And somehow that mattered. The following morning, I drove back to the lake house. I almost turned around 3 times. When I reached the property, the front door was open. Grant was outside near the garden. He saw my car. He stopped moving. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he walked toward me. "Caleb." My name sounded different in his voice. Softer. Almost uncertain. "Can we talk?" He nodded. We sat on the porch where we had spent so many evenings. The lake was calm. For a while, we simply listened to the water. "I read your letter," I said. Grant nodded. "I meant every word. I believe you." His eyes lifted. "But believing you doesn't mean I'm not still hurt." "I know." "I don't want to pretend everything is fine." "I don't want that either." I looked at him. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A chance to be honest with you." My throat tightened. "Even if I don't forgive you immediately?" "Especially then." I looked down at my hands. "Why me?" Grant smiled faintly. "I don't know." "That isn't a very romantic answer." He laughed softly. "I know." Then his expression became serious. Maybe because you never tried to impress me. I looked at him. You were just yourself, he continued. You were hurt, but you didn't become cruel. You were afraid, but you still cared about people. His voice became quieter. And somewhere along the way, I started caring about you more than I should have. I felt tears forming. Grant, I love you. The words didn't arrive dramatically. There was no perfect moment. No music. No carefully planned confession. Just two people sitting on an old porch, finally telling the truth. I looked at him. I love you too. His eyes closed briefly, like he had been holding his breath for weeks. But I wasn't finished. I love you, I said. And I'm still angry. He nodded. I understand. I don't know how long it will take before I trust you completely. I won't rush you. And I don't want promises you can't keep. You won't get them. I smiled through my tears. Good. Grant reached toward me, then stopped. He waited. The choice was mine. I looked at his hand. Then I placed mine in it. His fingers closed gently around mine. Nothing more happened. And somehow that was enough. For the first time since leaving, I didn't feel like I was running away from my feelings. I was sitting beside them, facing them. Maybe love wasn't about finding someone who never made mistakes. Maybe it was about finding someone willing to face the damage honestly. The sun began to lower over the lake. Grant looked at me. Do you want to stay for dinner? I smiled. Are you cooking? I was planning to. Then I'm suddenly reconsidering everything. He laughed. It was the first time I had heard that sound since I returned. I laughed too. The pain wasn't gone. The betrayal hadn't disappeared. But something new had begun. Not a perfect love. Not an easy one. A real one. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what might happen next. 3 weeks later, I returned to the lake house for good. At least that was what I told myself. I still had my apartment in the city, my regular job waiting for me, and a life that existed far away from the lake. But something about the house had changed. Or maybe I had changed. The same wooden porch looked different in the morning light. The same lake stretched beyond the trees. The same old windows reflected the sky. Yet I no longer saw the place as the beginning of my heartbreak. I saw it as the place where I had finally learned to be honest. Grant didn't ask me to stay. That mattered. He didn't make promises about forever. He didn't ask me to forget what had happened. He simply gave me space. And somehow that made me want to stay closer. Our relationship didn't become perfect overnight. There were still moments when I remembered what Mason had told him. Sometimes a small doubt would appear without warning. Sometimes I would become quiet, and Grant would notice. But instead of asking me to stop thinking about it, he listened. One evening, I told him, I still get scared sometimes. He looked at me. Of me? Of being wrong about you? Grant nodded. I understand. You're not angry? No. Why? Because trust doesn't come back because someone asks for it. His words stayed with me. He understood that rebuilding something could take longer than breaking it. That was one of the reasons I slowly began trusting him again. Not because he convinced me, because he showed me. Every day. In small ways. He told me where he was going. He answered difficult questions. He never hid conversations from me. And when something uncomfortable happened, we talked about it. There was no pretending. No secret corners. No carefully protected truths. Just honesty. Mason eventually apologized too. The first time we spoke, I wasn't ready to call him my best friend again. I told him that. He accepted it. I understand, he said. I don't want us to pretend nothing happened. I don't either. Then maybe we can start again. He nodded. Slowly. Slowly. That became the word I trusted most. Slowly. It meant there was no pressure, no performance, no need to make everything perfect. Weeks passed. The restoration project finally ended. The last room was painted. The porch was repaired. The garden was cleared. The house looked brighter than it had when I first arrived. On the final evening, Grant and I sat outside. The sunset spread across the lake. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Grant said, "You remember your first day here?" I smiled. "I remember thinking you were intimidating." "I was intimidating. You were terrible at making small talk." "I still am." I laughed. He looked at me. "You were planning to leave after 8 weeks." "I was." "And now?" I looked toward the house. "I don't know." Grant waited. I turned toward him. "I think I want to stay." His expression softened. "You don't have to." "I know." That was why I could say it. I wasn't staying because I owed him something. I wasn't staying because the summer job had changed my plans. I was staying because I wanted to. Grant reached for my hand. This time I didn't hesitate. Our fingers intertwined. The lake moved quietly in front of us. I thought about the person I had been when I arrived. Someone exhausted from trusting the wrong person. Someone who believed love always came with a price. Someone who thought protecting his heart meant keeping everyone outside it. I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned something difficult. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending betrayal never happened. It meant accepting the truth without allowing it to control every tomorrow. Grant had hurt me. I had hurt him too. We had both carried old wounds into something new. But instead of letting those wounds destroy us, we had finally learned to talk about them. Grant squeezed my hand. "What are you thinking?" I smiled. "That I almost left." "You did leave." "Okay. I almost never came back." He looked at me. "I'm glad you did." "So am I." The evening became quieter. The first stars appeared above the trees. Grant rested his shoulder against mine. I leaned closer. There was no need for grand promises. No need to say forever. We had learned that promises could be beautiful, but actions mattered more. So we simply stayed there, together. And somehow, that felt more romantic than anything I could have imagined. I had arrived at the lake house thinking I was there to repair an old property. Instead, the summer repaired something inside me. Not completely. Some scars remain. Some memories never disappear. But healing doesn't mean becoming the person you were before you were hurt. Sometimes healing means becoming someone who can still love after being hurt. Someone who can trust slowly. Someone who can forgive without forgetting. Someone who can look at another person and say, "I am afraid, but I'm still here." Grant turned toward me. "Caleb?" "Yeah." "Thank you for coming back." I smiled. "Thank you for giving me a reason to." He looked at me for a moment. Then he smiled. The same quiet smile I had noticed during my first week at the lake house. Only now I understood it. The summer had started with a job. It had continued with secrets. It had almost ended with betrayal. But it finished with something neither of us had expected. A second chance. Not a perfect one. A real one. And sometimes, I think that's the kind of love people need most. Not the kind that promises nothing will ever go wrong. The kind that says, when something does go wrong, we'll face it together. I looked across the lake one final time. The sunlight had disappeared completely, but I didn't feel afraid of the darkness anymore. I had spent so long believing that love meant giving another person the power to hurt me. Now I understood something different. Love meant choosing to be seen, even after hiding, even after disappointment, even after fear. And as Grant's hand remained wrapped around mine, I realized something else. I hadn't stayed because the summer was perfect. I stayed because it wasn't. Because somewhere between the mistakes, the secrets, the tears, and the forgiveness, we had found something honest. Something worth protecting. Something worth building slowly. Something worth staying for. And maybe that was the real reason I would always remember that summer. It wasn't the summer when I found love. It was the summer when I learned that love could survive the truth. If this story touched something you have carried quietly for years, remember that you are not alone. Sometimes the people who hurt us teach us how to protect our hearts. And sometimes the people who stay teach us that opening those hearts again can still be worth it.